This is Inside the Apple Studio, the podcast that details the intersection of architecture and Apple and explores how architects and other design professionals use Apple products in the practice of architecture. With your host, architect Neil Pan. Welcome to Inside the Apple Studio. In this episode, we'll be doing something a little different. Instead of hearing from another architect, we're going to talk with someone who you likely don't know, but who has a major impact on the tools architects use every day. We're also going to get a peek into some of the new features coming soon and learn what it takes to create an Apple Silicon native application, along with the benefits that come with it. I'm pleased to welcome Vectorworks Chief Technology Officer, Steve Johnson, to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome. It's great to be here. It's a very exciting time to be in architecture and around Apple.
Yes, I know, right? With all of the new, we're going to get more into it later, but Apple Silicon, to me, just feels like it's going to open up a whole new world for architects and software vendors like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's get started first off with, if for listeners who may not already be familiar with Vectorworks, can you share some history of Vectorworks and how it's used in the AEC industry?
Well, sure. It's kind of related to the excitement about Apple. If you think about the history, it goes all the way back to 1985, and Vectorworks was MiniCAD. It was born on an Apple Lisa back in the time. It's called MiniCAD because it was running on a mini computer. And then that name kind of stuck, but we didn't like Mini, so it changed to Vectorworks. So it was born on the Mac, and then of course, it enjoys the all that comes with that. It was originally a 3D program. It was kind of the Mac draft that came back way back then.
Yeah,
it started as MiniCAD, but it really kind of excelled in the beginning, taking mostly architects, from the pencil and paper to the first digital wave, and really kind of excelled because it really could be celebrated on it with its presentations, the graphics that are associated with Apple, and just design, that whole sense of what Apple meant. We kind of built off that because we gave designers, the AEC industry, a place to move to the digital world and to create plans and drawings that just looked great. And so we're really, really part of our core heritage. And then as the time went on, the newer digital revolution, moving to a more 3D world and moving to BIM and all that stuff, we take that whole, transition. It's been a long time. We're in following technology and all these trends over 30 years. So we've been at it for a long time. We went through Apple's transition from PowerPC to Intel. We went to Windows. We added geometry kernels. We got more and more sophisticated with what we're doing over time. And then we added products too. And so Vectorworks, it finds itself serving designers. We'll talk more about why we feel that's at our core, but designers in a lot of places. But a lot of the places are in and around buildings, whether the building sits on a site or you have an interior space, or even designing things that go into those spaces, or entertainment too. So we have three. Vectorworks is now serving many industries, but it was really born serving the architectural industry and the buildings and all the spaces and things that are in and around that.
Now, you've worked at Vectorworks for a few years now. Take us through your various roles at Vectorworks and define what your role as a Chief Technology Officer is at Vectorworks, and kind of what do you do with that?
To kind of just get into the history of that, I have these gray hairs, if your viewers could see it. So I have been here a while. I just finished this year with that intern. I started at Vectorworks as kind of an intern way back when, but that intern gave me gave me some insights into, how the customers are using it. It used to be I would get interns, and do technical stuff. So now as CTO, I've come up from the beginning as an intern, and then moving into the 2D stuff and to the 3D stuff and doing all that technology stuff. And now I kind of watch over that. CTO, every company is a technology company these days. Our architects, they run technology companies, and ours is a big company, but I kind of do, my part is the core technology that serves all those products, the core technology that runs underneath the Macintosh platform, and it serves, all of our design problems. So So that's kind of where I fit in. It's not the entire technical officer for the entire operation, but focusing on the core Vectorworks application and all of its technology that needs to keep up and be reinvented and relevant as we move forward. And that's kind of a constant theme. And so I kind of look forward to managing all that effort. That's kind of what I do.
Well, that's a good segue into the next several questions, really. And I want to talk about some of the challenges of maintaining and improving an application like Vectorworks that has such a long history in the AEC industry. How do you address improving or fixing features that have existed in Vectorworks for years?
Yeah, that's a constant challenge. And you get it, these fixing or things that kind of get maybe rough edges as you migrate to new technologies. That's one way things can be introduced, or things that just don't quite have they don't get visited a lot. But there are these things, and we constantly are looking for those. I mean, we're constantly trying to evolve to be relevant, but it's existing features. These are important too. And one of the ways we're doing that is I've been kind of a vice president and CTO for about 3 years, but we kind of simplified our mission. We're really, and for my area, quality and performance and user interface and experience, we're just simplifying that. We're not trying to sell software all the time with new features necessarily. We're trying to solve the software as a solution. And in most of our new customers, they don't know about new features. They just need something solid. And so we focus on evolving and being relevant, but also we have time when we do less to be able to focus on these features that you might be, you're hinting at. I mean, I went and looked at your questions. You were polling some Twitter people, and they mentioned the trim tool. And so I said, well, we're always trying to fix things. So I went and looked at the trim tool, and we have an improvement there. We did fix it. We gained some insight because we're very serious about our forum and the way we engage with customers. I think, Vectorworks, I think compared to the others, we really are connected. It may not feel like it all the time, but, we do have our ears out and listening to these things. And these matter if the total package includes all these existing features, all the things we're good at with 2D drafting. We don't want them to get rusty or have loose edges. It's all part of, I think, polishing that to reach our goals. So how do we improve fixing them? Well, we have our ears out.
Yeah.
We're doing less each year because of the way people interact with their software. They're not buying it new every year.
Right.
So we're not pressured to as much to have new features. I mean, there's new iterations and we stay relevant, and that's all important too. So the question, how do you work with that? It's a balance.
Has the move to software subscription kind of helped that balance? Because you just mentioned you're not always fixated on the new features to sell the product each year as it's being updated. Has that made a big change in that?
It really, it has. And I wouldn't call it subscription because we have lots of ways to own and interact with your software. Subscription is new, and that can be a choice for people that makes some sense. There's reasons why that's good. But it's not just subscription. One of the numbers we track are we have a Vectorworks Service Select. You become you buy into that, and that gets you the automatic updates and things like that. And those customers we track, we want to keep them. So, it's not so much about, having to get new customers, although we need them, but they're not buying because of the new feature. They're buying because of the reputation and the way we take care of the designers that we have. And so it really, you say, has subscription changed it? I think that's kind of a metaphor for it. I mean, you treat software purchasing differently, but we as developers, we treat it differently in that it's just focusing on the solution and these long-standing nagging issues and quality, and then also staying relevant. These are all more important than flashy new stuff.
Sure.
It does help address some of the issues that you mentioned.
Well, how do you balance fixing older issues or fixing issues that may have come up, and you mentioned the trim tool, for instance, and balancing that between assigning resources to create new features? How do you judge that balance, and how do you do that in your role?
Well, one way is that we, when we're doing less and focusing on less, then we have time to look at these other things that are standing outside of what people might say needs to be done as a new feature. So it's interesting at this time of year, this is kind of part of the cycle where we're trying to arrange what are the newer, bigger features, but this is where we look at some of those older features, and we look at those and listen, and they find a way of being folded into the mix. So the balance, it's a juggling act. There's no real formula. It's driven primarily by some simple goals that I was saying that really come from new expectations on the software, and that is, we're doing less, doing it better, focusing on quality. So it just has a place.
Mm-hmm.
It's how does it balance it? It's more important than it used to be, maybe when we were selling software every year by having, lots of bells and whistles. Those are less important. So the balance kind of comes naturally in that the way we develop is different.
Now, you mentioned the forums earlier. What impact does submitting like bug reports or posting in that forum help you prioritize where your team spends their time between major releases?
It's very important. We're on there listening. We have a team that basically, when the forum team sees something, we have a Slack channel, not a modern new tools, and we just bring in people so that we connect the engineers to that specific issue. So we look at them as they come in. So there's a rhythm of listening to it, and that's happening all the time. The bugs reporting, that gives us something concrete to work with. So it's a nice way to have the files and a real world workflow, and we can then contact users too. Now, everybody has their little, their one issue, and it might not be that's, going to rise up and can be fixed right away. It might be that it really is a part of a re-engineering effort that might need to happen. And so we need to kind of plan, well, when am I going to take this class of things and deal with those? So and it can take time. It's not it's not just, let's go to the forum and pick 30 and do them and be done with it. What we're doing is kind of complex, and it takes some planning, and that's kind of what we're doing. We ask, what are we doing? We're trying to achieve that balance.
When you mentioned re-engineering aspects of the software to, say, fix a specific issue, it takes a much larger effort to do that. Mm-hmm. How do you go about maybe communicating to the community that this is a bigger issue than just a quick software fix? And we're looking at re-engineering, we have to do these things to fix this, and it's a bigger problem than this one issue sounds like. How do you go about communicating that to the users so that they understand, okay, that may not get fixed in the release 1 or release 2 of a major software, but that's maybe a year from now, or maybe on a longer roadmap to fix, or maybe we're not going to ever fix that because it's going to get replaced by some other new technology. And I'm completely theorizing here, but how do you go about communicating that to the users so that you can alleviate some of their frustration in the meantime?
It's a challenge. If they were lucky enough to see us maybe on the road shows or design summit, we might be able to share some of that information. But we have a new tool that we're making public. It's called our public roadmap. It's new. Mm-hmm. It's being shared, and it kind of gives us, it kind of arranges what we're planning. It's a roadmap, and it has 3 sections: what's scheduled, what's under development, and what's being researched. And we just added a more interactive element to this so that we can get feedback there. But to answer your question, how are we going to do that? We're working on that, and this roadmap is kind of a symbol of that, because it's at least it's a forward-facing way for you to see, and it does speak to technology things that we're working on, and so you can kind of see those pockets. You might be able to see it like in an architecture. We have a lot of things with architectural things having to do with that are in and about and related to walls and windows, and our windows, and we have lots of markets, so it's very regional, and so it's a tough problem.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you see in that roadmap is it's wall re-engineering. We're kind of having to revamp the wall so that we can service some of these nagging issues that users want to evolve some of the solutions we have, and that's an example of a re-engineering project that we have some in this release that speak to that.
Yeah,
but that's going on in the background, and so the roadmap is a way that we can do that. That's a tool we've just developed.
When you mention the roadmap, I'm curious how much of an effect of, say, when Apple comes out with their announcements at their Worldwide Developers Conference, which is typically in the early summer, June, typically, how does that affect your roadmap, or does it at all? Because that's coming, Apple's going to be introducing new features. So how do you plan on engineering Vectorworks to anticipate, like, okay, we think Apple might do X, or we don't know what they're going to do, but we need to be prepared for it?
Right.
And how do you address that?
Yeah, that's I mean, we have a very concrete story that we can tell about Apple Silicon, but before it, 2 or 3 years back, we, at the developer conference, they announced that OpenGL, their graphics technology, they were going to replace that and that we deprecate it.
Right.
And so we knew we have our own graphics technology that provides the rendered interactive solid shading. We call it our Vectorworks graphics module, but it was built on top of OpenGL, and we knew, and we had to start a project 3 years ago. Well, we've always been working on it, but we actively began on the metal conversion.
Right.
In a 2-year project. So I think that's like speaks directly to that question. I mean, we got that. We had to, re-engineer at the very low level stuff, talking with the GPU, and again, to move forward, to be relevant with larger and larger BIM models and expectations. That was 2 years ago, beginning to move to metal.
Right.
We happened to have a wonderful bridge with when they released their Apple Silicon. It wasn't, that didn't come out like at the developer conference last June. It was more of a story about Monterey, and they didn't have the next generation of Apple Silicon. But what I'm saying is, we knew that ARM support in Apple Silicon was coming, and metal would be an important part of that. And then we found a way to, and we might talk about this later because it's an interesting story about doing becoming native. So how does it affect it? We see that it's really important. We plan for it. And then if it's squeezed like native was, we move because we could, and it's exciting. And that's our Silicon story, which I don't want to get distracted.
Sure. We're going to get to that. We're definitely going to get to it. I do want to ask you quickly, though, what sort of interaction or feedback or assistance do you get from Apple when you're working through, when they announce the beta and you go through this summer-long beta process with Apple and their operating system? How much interaction or feedback do you have with Apple on that?
This year, it's a lot, and so I'm a little more biased, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But it comes out, and it's Mojave came out, and we had that one. Apple was really moving a little fast, and they kind of caught us, and then we had to interact with them and submit bugs over the summer and try to get to a stable, release. And we got through that. This year, for example, we have a connection with Apple. Mm-hmm. Rob is his name, and he helps us and prioritizes things to help us get from the early release of, let's make it current, Monterey, mm-hmm. and through the release. Now they're coming out with their Monterey very soon. We've been testing on it since then. We're remarkably well placed. There was very few issues, and only really one showstopper were the save dialogue, and it's an Apple bug. It was too wide, and anyways, we communicated with Apple, and they were able to fix it. And so that's how do we communicate? We have our connections.
Okay.
And that's just mostly the rhythm there is what new technology is coming out. Well, they say Apple's, metal is the new thing. So we react.
Right.
And then there's new beta software, and then there's bugs in their software, and we beta test and we work with them so that we be ready for our customers when they flip the switch and everybody starts to upgrade automatically.
Well, I want to move our discussion in talking a little bit about some specific BIM and other applications service features of Vectorworks. What's your approach on adding new BIM tools, for instance? And specifically, I'll mention like the stair tool. I know that's a whole new BIM tool that was added to Vectorworks recently. And how do you make these types of BIM tools simple enough to, say, in the case of the stair tool, model a stair quickly, against adding so much complexity through the customization that it becomes too cumbersome to use?
And the stair tool is a good story there because, the stair ultimately has a lot of, outcomes, and it's hard to have everything controlled from a dialogue, say, and it has many parameters, and it is complex, and it stands out, and people have been talking about that. Well, how do we do it? This year we've added some interactive direct modeling reshaping to the stair. So, and it's kind of it's one of our favorite features this year. So the stair has how do we do it? We have a stair tool that's complicated, and we're trying to make it simple by providing some of these direct modeling reshape grips around it so that it can be more of a conceptual tool at that point, and it can be less of a burden and barrier.
Yeah.
And that probably the direct modeling, we want to apply that to some of other things like windows and doors. We have some features this time about per face texturing, to be able to texture things on a per face thing, to be able to control it more directly. We can talk more about that, but
Yeah.
Giving more direct modeling so that this complexity is not so much dialogue driven, it's more interactive. We're always aiming for that.
So as you see that users are having more difficulty than you anticipated with the tool, then you're going back and like, how do we make that tool a little bit easier for somebody to use?
Yes. Our solution is very powerful and complex and has all kinds of capability. We are always wrestling with how do you make it simpler and easier to use. That's
Sure.
part of our simple guiding principles. I mean, we have some baggage of things, long history in it, but that's kind of how do we do it? We're constantly focusing on it because it's an important challenge, and we know it's needed and appreciated. So
now Vectorworks has integrations with more and more different applications and services like BIM Object and others that extend that functionality of the software. What are some of the more recent integrations that you've added, and what are the challenges of bringing them into Vectorworks?
We've added a few of them. I mean, we have a Celibri Connect that lets you connect with the Celibri workflows. We've connected to some real-time rendering solutions like Inkscape and Lumion. Well, that's a Windows-only solution. So this year we have a connection to Twinmotion, a direct connection to Twinmotion.
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly, our partnership, I said we have quality performance drives us, user interaction, and that's a big thing, but partner connections is another one, and we're constantly trying to expand that.
I want to next talk about how Vectorworks markets and offers training. And one of the questions I did get from the public was, and I'm kind of phrasing it like this, is that your competitors are widely used in schools, and that generates graduates that already have knowledge of how to use those tools, which I'm hearing from some of my listeners. It makes it difficult for their firms to choose Vectorworks in finding quality applicants, that already are using it. And how do you get those applicants? So I'm curious, what's Vectorworks' approach on providing students licensing, and what's the plan to have the software more widely used maybe in schools?
The licensing and having free licensing and student additions, teachers, and free lab installations is something we do.
Okay.
The challenge is more about making reaching out and getting some footholds there, and so it's definitely something we know that's a key. So we want to get in and make student licensing easy and accessible, and labs, and we get teachers to buy onto that. But we're also trying to make it more approachable and easier to learn with our Vectorworks University. And so, even learning outside, lifelong learning is an option there. It reminds me of my intern I had this year who was an industrial design student, and his project was kind of, how do you approach it? But I'm hoping he takes it back to school and become, try to build on that and see if there's more adoption. We can talk some, Georgia Tech into doing more, making it more easy for them to get hold of Vectorworks. It's easy for them to get it. It's cheap for them to get it. It's free. It's just that hurdle, and yes, it'd be great to just push a button and have all classes doing that. That's a marketing and sales activity, but
yeah,
we're trying to make the software as easy to use, and the Vectorworks University is a new addition for that's connected to the software.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the training resources that Vectorworks provides. What sort of training, you just mentioned Vectorworks University. Tell me a little bit more about that, and what other sort of opportunities are there?
We provide custom training, and we can do that. And then the Vectorworks University is new, and that has a curriculum and pace, that you can follow and to learn Vectorworks. And it's also going to be growing so that individual companies or practices can actually customize that so that bring people on through and take advantage of that platform as a learning resource.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have custom training that we provide, and then the Vectorworks University is the other component that we're it's in its second year now, and it's really going to be an important part of servicing that goal.
So with the custom training, is that something that if I was a Vectorworks user and I wanted to learn about a specific subject, or I'm having a difficulty on the stair tool, for instance, as we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
is that something that, I can contact Vectorworks and have a trainer work with me one-on-one?
There's the customer success that would let you work with that one-on-one. And then there's the training where you could call up and arrange for I would think if that was the stair tool, I'm sure we could have a training session for that and customize it to your need. Yeah, it usually is like an office that wants to bring in a trainer to kind of get them help train the office, but it's totally flexible in that sense.
All right. So there are options out there for folks that want to learn more or increase their knowledge of maybe software they've been using for a number of years.
Yeah, there's a common scenario is they've got even the existing Vectorworks customers, just knowing what's there they're not using, as well as new users who step in.
Right. Let's move to Apple Silicon. Vectorworks has been around for a long time and has likely some long established code. How much effort did it take to get Vectorworks 2022 ready to run natively on Apple Silicon?
A lot.
Very understated there.
No, I mean, it's we had the key to Apple Silicon is, we have all of our code, which we can, to use the computers, we compile it, and Apple gave us tools to make that fairly straightforward. And that's a big thing. But then we also have more than 100 dependencies with other third-party things, whether it be our geometry kernel Parasolid,
mm-hmm.
or with Google, we have a Chromium sort of interface for web things. There's lots of different third-party softwares, and that probably was the biggest challenge, was getting them to also participate, because it's kind of all or nothing to have a universal binary. If you want to launch Vectorworks, and you will,
mm-hmm.
You get it, you'll launch it right now, and it runs natively, and it's a delightful experience. But for that to work, all of our code has been recompiled into a universal binary format for Intel and ARM,
mm-hmm.
and all of software is distributed, and when we use libraries from other parties, all those providers have to also provide that universal binary. So we would compile open source solutions. We would talk to our third parties. They'd provide us delivered universal binaries, and we had our part. And so all that comes together into one Vectorworks installed on your desktop, and you launch it, and you're running native. We're really thrilled about where it is. And when you get it, and we don't have a lot of people, we have a few people who can experience it with their M1 machines. It's a real delight.
So you kind of sort of described a little bit about what my next question is that when you're creating this native version, and you mentioned you have different libraries, do you take some of these libraries that have been already converted and others, and then just launch the software and see what breaks? What is kind of that process of what's working, what's not? How does that process work to get to what you eventually get to, which is the Apple Silicon native version? I'm just curious a little bit about that process.
We're not really using software you start up and launch as much as it's they provide us software that we either put in one of the folders in the application bundle, and then it starts, and we talk through APIs, and you say, I want to Parasolid do this, and it'll go do it, and it'll run Intel code before, and then we have to talk to them and say, well, when are you going to give me the Parasolid library
mm-hmm.
that will, when I call you and ask you to do this, you'll do it natively. And so they have to implement all of we talk in terms of APIs. They just have to implement all their APIs, which we already talked to.
Mm-hmm.
And when they provide that and compile it into a universal binary, it kind of it hooks up and calls that stuff. And now we need to test it, but it's not, well, I don't know what else to say about that. That's with Parasolid. Now, some of the libraries they're third party, and so they come in as source.
Mm-hmm.
That means we have to compile it and use the Apple tools. So how do you do it? You have to talk the third party providers into doing it, or we have to compile it ourselves, and then we have to make sure it works. The easier thing about it, not easier thing, is nothing is changing. There's no outcomes that are changing. It's just A lot of it's done with the Apple tools for their compilers. That's probably why Parasolid could do what they did for us quickly. That's why we could do it quickly too. So how Apple provided good tools,
Mm-hmm.
and we had dedication and commitment.
Now, speaking of that dedication and commitment, Apple last year, actually, when they first made the announcement of Apple Silicon in the summer of 2020, provided a developer kit, a Mac Mini. Were you using that developer kit? Did you get a hold of some of those to see what would happen?
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah, I forget about this. That's as soon as they were available, it was 2 days, and it arrived, and then that's part of the process. Got on that and started examining what was necessary, and it took a while. It's such a big one. It took a while to be able to actually see something running. You kind of had to work on the tools and and kind of work on pieces and using that developer kit. And then it wasn't until I think it was probably February before we actually had a stripped down, well, maybe it was even March, a stripped down version of Vectorworks that, removing all the stuff that just take away everything except what's really essential. And it was not till March where we could, run it. So yes, we started with their developer kit at WWDC in June. It was probably June 7th, I think.
Yeah, right.
And it was one individual's job at that point to kind of just explore and work with that. And then the team grew as we gained more and more knowledge about it. And that's the rest is history.
Well, you've kind of described some of the challenges. I'm curious, what are some of the pleasant surprises that you encountered in getting version 2022 ready for Apple Silicon?
They were all over the place. When you start up the application, it was a minute on my Intel, late model MacBook Intel.
Yeah.
On my M1, it took 14 seconds.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
I mean, we knew we wanted to be there, and you look back and you look at the engineering more specifically, you can see why it's happening. It's really impressive. But I mean, that's a simple message. Now that shows itself in a lot of ways. That's kind of taken advantage of, the silicon on a chip. Mm-hmm. And just things at 7 nanometers, 5 nanometers,
yeah,
and closer coupling, and the way it's all more technology than I even understand, although I'm impressed. That just all moves and functions faster and more efficiently. And so the startup, you see it with any CPU based things like a rendering, you'll see it being faster because of the RISC architecture underneath the hood. And the one I really liked was these came out with just 8 gigabytes. I got the MacBook Air.
Okay.
Because that was the first one I'd get my hands on. And the silicon on a chip and the way it interacts with your SSD,
yeah,
it makes that memory almost like it's RAM. It really blurs that. So, people say, well, it's not a professional machine, and that's true, and they're going to have bigger machines later. But the thing that really surprised me at that point was I was running this on a MacBook Air with 8 gigabytes just because that was the fastest thing I could get. And I was loading files that were challenging my, MacBook,
the Intel version.
Yeah. And then I got a new one with, has a 16 gigabytes, but things just work. So, bigger BIM files come in and they work more efficiently because of that, even though you're sitting, with just 16 gigabytes.
Right.
Things like selecting objects, it's just crisp. It's fast. Everything is just fast. The Apple has all the UI controls that you see, and we have a big interface with lots of controls in our info palette or in our. They have some low-level stuff behind the scenes that makes all that stuff faster too. So, all that interface that is created and moved around fast under the hood, and that has to do with metal. They use metal for their interface, and then we're talking directly to metal too, which is kind of the final point for all the stuff inside the drawing window, where our frame rates are smoother and twice as fast. And it's hard to point to any one particular thing. I mean, I think the opening timing is a very clear thing, but all this stuff is working for you. And when it's working for you, it's just a real delight. I think Apple customers who happen to get this are going to be totally delighted, because it's just, what if you're driving down the road and it's 55 miles an hour? Well, and we see this across the board, it's twice as fast on almost everything or more.
Wow.
just imagine if they raise the speed limit to twice as much, and how that kind of just gets rid of a major limitation or a frustration. You're designing and you're waiting on your software. I mean, that's our challenge anyways. Every day we try to remove the burden of waiting on software that has lots of, designs that have lots of data. Just making that fast is always a challenge. And then when you get this M1 bonus on top of it, it just, if I sound excited or overly excited, it's because I can't help it.
Yeah, well, no, that's great. Let's keep the excitement going. What sort of new features are coming to Vectorworks 2022?
I'll be glad to talk about them. I mean, there's there's core features. We kind of performance improvements, some BIM workflows and interoperability and user interface stuff. But we can go through some of them.
Sure.
We've talked about Apple and Apple Silicon and metal. That's certainly a big story. But then there's also other next generation tech we talk about, and that's our Maxon connection.
Okay.
Our Maxon built-in, they provide our built-in rendering solution with it we call Renderworks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've now taken advantage of their Redshift. They bought into the Redshift was an acquisition,
mm-hmm.
and Redshift is a GPU-based rendering technology, which is now because of our relationship there, we're now connected to a new Redshift render mode, which gives you a connection, taking Vectorworks and rendering it with Maxon's new GPU-based rendering. And so it has real value now, and that it gives you some significant speed improvements for real-time rendering.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a statement about just being connected to the next generation of technology. They're working on you're going to make real-time rendering as fast as what we're used to working with our OpenGL or our metal thing. So it comes in this release as Redshift render mode, and it's connected to our Renderworks solution, and so that gives you a nice feature and a nice reminder that we're in it for the long haul here. It's going to be some all good stuff coming.
Okay.
I passed over it, but there's a big thing. The Mac customers this year have a lot to be excited about. And finally, they got a twin motion connection. We've had these external third-party rendering connections that were Windows only, and that was a little frustrating for a while. So twin motion direct link. We did an export of Epic's Datasmith file format, which is kind of that's their new next generation way of talked about APIs. That's
mm-hmm.
the way you talk to Epic, and that's the way you talked in a modern way to twin motion. So others have had the twin motion connection before, but now this is a twin motion connection with a direct connect with their new modern API, which is a good solution now and a good forward positioning for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Hidden line rendering is now being done in the background. A constant re-engineering. I'm focusing on some of the core technologies first, but the hidden line rendering, it's a bottleneck of time, and it's being done in the background now, and it's kind of moving to our interactive real-time sort of pattern. So it works in the background and it doesn't distract you or make you wait. Mm-hmm. And so it's a small a good improvement for speed, but it's also a reminder of where we're going to constantly try to improve performance. Wall component control. This is our first installment of this re-engineering of our walls so that we can better serve some of the things that are kind of nagging at us, or getting to the next level of some of the things that we're looking for. And so the wall component, the re-engineering involved in making our walls have real geometry inside so that you could report on them better. And also now we can wrap components around window openings. So that's kind of a nice, there's a multifaceted part of this. It's re-engineering for the future. It's re-engineering for better data reporting, which is a big story with Vectorworks. And then it's also, has this component wrapping capability that's new and in this release. The direct stair editing is a feature we like to talk about. You already mentioned that. It's an interactive sort of reshaping of the stair, so it makes it more approachable.
Okay.
You asked about the history of Vectorworks. It was born as a 3D program. It had a worksheet built into it. It had data records built into it and scripting. So we've had this all along, and now, we're trying to remind ourselves of this. And data tags is a real nice thing we've been working on for the last couple features, where it's kind of a consistent way of pointing at things mm-hmm. in the drawing and having it extract data out for the user. So they kind of automatically update, and it really improves a lot of our workflows. And so there's a set of improvements there. I think my favorite one for the BIM world is the worksheet expansion, which kind of talks about a lot of things. But for the customer, the forward-facing part of that is our criteria interface. It was rather unapproachable. It was difficult and slow to work with, but it's the heart of being able to have a data tag or a worksheet formula pull out data for you. And so the criteria dialog has a new UI overhaul, and it's really, I think it's really a big feature for this release. And so it also kind of builds on our materials that we added last cycle. It gives us some better reporting on materials inside the components of walls and inside the components of the site. The worksheet expansion task is a real winner in the BIM workflow area. All buildings sit on sites, and Vectorworks, I think, is unique in that sense, is that you can work with the site and the building at the same time. That's our landmark product. The landscape, we have garden designers, but we also have architects that want the site, and the site now has components like walls do. So it just makes, a big push for us is to make BIM for landscape, because, we have all this data in our model and in the landscape solution too. And so it's not just architects who want to report on quantities and materials and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that's a huge aspect for landscape architects.
I think it really is. We always are looking at interoperability and file exchange. So that's a constant thing. There's a GIS is a new addition. Last cycle, we brought in images, and you could pull from ArcGIS, Esri. You could pull in images into your design, geolocated, and that's a nice feature. What's added this cycle is we call them ArcGIS feature layers, so we can get data that's polygons and vector things, maybe the sewer lines or various things that are geolocated that might contribute to your design. So ArcGIS feature layers. Part of the worksheet expansion is just adding more and more formula that can pull data out. The project sharing, that's our collaboration solution. It had some enhancements to kind of keep track of what's been checked out. That's a smaller feature. Mm-hmm. So Solibri Direct is the one I meant. You asked about connections with third parties, and Solibri, we use IFC to kind of exchange data to do the analysis that can come from Solibri workflows.
Okay.
One of my favorites is part of the Apple Silicon story, but they're very interested in us because we'll tell a great story for them. So suddenly, we've always communicated with them, but now their marketing department wants to have all our stuff because it's a great story. And we can get into that again. I'm sorry to keep going back, but to send them 2022, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they're going to install it and it opens up. And our user interface now, subtle improvement, but our attribute palette and our snapping palette are kind of arranged, and they look like they belong. It's part of our user interface. We want the skin, the look to be modern. It's grown over the years. So it's, quality and performance are big, but user interface is big. And so when they open this up, Apple opens it up and they see, what we're proud of. It's an evolution in our user interface, and the attribute palette this cycle has been evolved not only in where it works, but we've removed a lot of the nested dialogues. You can work directly. It's kind of part of the whole spirit of direct editing. When you go and you change the opacity, you don't need a preview dialog to open, set it, close it, look at it, go back. So it's a user experience. It's not just the skin. It's not just skin deep. It's some neat behaviors, and we're constantly working on that. It's a designer's program. If we want new users, if we want to compete in the educational session, when they launch Vectorworks, they need to see that this is one of our goals. It's the design, the user interface. We want it to look like it was designed with an intent. So we're always working on that, but it's a usability thing as well.
Right.
Our whole design workflow from, we call it sketch to BIM sometimes, but conceptual all the way through documentation. And we know SketchUp is a product people use, but we think our conceptual modeling, our 3D modeling we have many customers who just drop that. They work directly in Vectorworks because it's just you don't have to import stuff, and we have all kinds of great capabilities, and every year we come up with one. And this year we addressed the texturing, and I mentioned it before, but just be able to control texture on a per face so you just point with a paint tool and set the texture and drag and drop textures. So it's kind of an evolution of our texturing interface, and it's an exciting new feature.
If you had to pick one, which feature are you most excited about in this next release?
Oh,
I'm putting you on the spot here.
yeah. I mean, it could be the reshape tool now has a mode that lets you fix the area as you reshape, but I don't know if I want to call that one. I mean, I always am going to say Apple Silicon,
Yeah.
but the criteria interface to me is my favorite, and the worksheet expansion, because it's, it really unleashes what we've been, really what's the power hiding behind all this design we have. All this data is behind there. We've always had great presentation. We've talked about data visualization as a tool that changed the way you visualize stuff.
Yeah.
And the interface to that, or the interface to a data tag, or the interface to a worksheet, all this access to the data that's your design, it's much more accessible with this criteria interface, because it used to be kind of hidden behind you had to work hard at it.
Yeah.
And so I love it because it kind of, it opens the door. It removes a limit to what's a really big thing for what Vectorworks does. So, there's always all this stuff that Vectorworks, things are hidden. People don't know about it, or they might not be as easy to use. And this criteria, I just think, is symbolic of it's great in and of itself, but it's symbolic of a lot of things, ease of use, all the data in our model. It's a great BIM feature. So if you're pressed, and I can't say M1 or Apple Silicon, which I'm not, I'm going to pick that one.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fair enough. So as we start to wrap up here, I want you to at least reflect on, I mean, we've talked about all the different things that and the work that's gone into this. Can you tell me a little bit about the teams and the people behind the software at Vectorworks?
I could go on and on. I mean,
I want to shout out to the people that are doing all of this hard work to make this happen.
Well, they'd love it. I wish I could give all their names. I can't wait. No, I mean, the R&D part of this is one side, and then we have the and I could talk about that, but then the marketing and our, when we go to Apple and they say your website looks awesome, that's a pretty cool compliment. So this whole interaction with Apple has reminded me how the whole organization is cooking.
Yeah.
But underneath them, the teams I look over, I mean, the R&D, and there's the product part. I talked about the building, and I watch over the technology that covers all these different areas. So we had the part of R&D focuses on the individual products and servicing all those. And those are the teams, the architect team and the landmark team and the spotlight or entertainment team, and our, the team that puts together our publications, the help and stuff like that. My team, the teams that do the Vectorworks graphics module, that team that gave us metal, very, very impressive contribution, very impressive engineering.
It sounds like a huge effort from a lot of different people at Vectorworks to make this all come to fruition.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I really am proud of that, because back when you asked about the history and the evolution, back when we started, there was probably 10 people, and it was on the splash screen. All of us were on the splash screen that worked on it. And then we all would work on individual features. Well, now we have 300 in the organization, and to pull off metal, or to pull off Apple Silicon, or to pull off the worksheet and the worksheet expansion, it takes a big team, and you have to, and they do have to work together. And it's a very challenging and rewarding place. The trim tool working, or whatever feature they see, it's a complex world we work on, but we got it. Our hearts are all in the right place. I mean, everybody's chasing the aspirations that, your listeners they want us to do this. And that's why we tune into the forum. That's why we lean into new technology, and we're bold there, because we have to remain relevant. And I don't know. I could go on, and I'm sure I'm going too far, but yeah, there's all kinds of people that should be shouted out, and the spotlight should be shown. We just had our chilling ceremony every year. we have a champagne chilling ceremony, and it's a celebration. And when the R&D talks about it, what we celebrate them, and then we hand it over to the rest of the organization because now they're going to sell it. So, that's the cycle. Every year we come to release, we talk to you guys every year, and it reminds us of what a challenge we have and how good we should feel about what we're doing. So
where can users go to learn more about the options available of Vectorworks, the different versions, and also the cost involved in either upgrading or in purchasing new if they're interested in that?
The US release is behind us. That's what we're talking about now. And going to vectorworks.net will give you the information you want. And I didn't even realize I was kind of feeding to that question. The website is beautiful. You go there and you would find the options. And we do have a lot of options. It's not a subscription only option. Perpetual license are there. And so you'll see all the options there. And the pricing, it varies a little bit over, each market, but you'll check, when you check out there, you'll see, the pricing is, you'll find out the pricing information. I don't think it's increasing, and I haven't really studied that, but I think that's where you go, vectorworks.net.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you very much for spending the time to talk to us and give us the history and some of the thought process that goes into how do you upgrade and how do you manage an existing application like this, and then all of the new exciting stuff. I really appreciate you sharing the story of Apple Silicon and some of the new features that are coming out in Vectorworks 2022. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great, exciting time to be in and around Apple and the design area. We're very excited about it. I'm so glad we could talk to you because it's really symbolic of a big release for us.
Well, great. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Apple Studio. I'd like to thank my guest, Vectorworks CTO Steve Johnson, for joining me. If you are enjoying the podcast, be sure to tell a friend and show them how to follow the show in their favorite podcast player. I've been your host, Neil Pan, and you can find me on Twitter at NPANN. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Apple for Arc. That's Apple, FORARCH. Inside the Apple Studio is a production of Apple for Architects at appleforarchitects.com.